The rain hammered my truck's windshield like bullets from heaven, and I sat there in my own driveway, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the warm yellow glow spill from what used to be my house. 42 years old, and I'd become the punchline in my own marriage. Pete, Baker, Grady. They called me back in the day when I rode with the road dogs, when my Harley was my church and the open highway was my prayer. Now I'm just Pete, the mechanical engineer. Pete, the guy who gave up everything for a woman who treats him like yesterday's newspaper. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd traded my leather jacket for a wedding ring, my bike for a mortgage, my brotherhood for a woman who now looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. Maggie Grady, née Thompson, paralegal extraordinaire with her perfectly pressed skirts and her perfectly fake smile, had made it crystal clear that the man she married wasn't the man she wanted anymore. I grabbed my toolbox from the truck bed, water cascading off the brim of my baseball cap. The front porch light flickered on, and through the window I could see Maggie's silhouette at the kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something that sure as heck wasn't anything I'd said in the past 6 months. The house felt colder than the October rain when I stepped inside. Maggie didn't look up from her conversation, just waved dismissively in my direction like I was the pizza delivery guy. Her voice carried that sing-song quality she reserved for people who mattered, which apparently didn't include her husband of 12 years. "Oh, Brett, you're terrible," she giggled into the phone, twirling a strand of her auburn hair around her finger. Brett Garis, her boss at the law firm, the guy with the bad comb-over and the bright red Mustang who thought his political connections made him God's gift to our little coastal town. I set my toolbox down harder than necessary. The metallic clang finally got her attention. "Hold on, Brett," she said, covering the phone with her manicured hand. "Pete, you're dripping all over my clean floor." "Sorry about that," I said, not sorry at all. Didn't realize the rain was my fault, too. She rolled her eyes and went back to her conversation. "Sorry, where were we? Oh, yes, the Henderson case." I stood there for a moment, water pooling around my work boots, listening to my wife discuss legal strategy with another man at 9 o'clock at night. The smart thing would have been to grab a towel, change clothes, maybe heat up the dinner she'd left wrapped in plastic on the counter. Instead, I found myself studying her face, looking for traces of the woman who used to wait up for me when I worked late, who used to care if I came home safe. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. That woman was gone, replaced by this stranger who scheduled our conversations like business meetings and looked at me like I was a project she'd given up on. "Real men don't play games, Pete," she'd told me just last week when I'd suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us. "They make things happen." I guess Brett Garis made things happen. Brett with his expensive suits and his corner office and his ability to make my wife laugh like she used to laugh with me. The kitchen felt smaller than it used to, cramped with all the things we weren't saying to each other. I opened the refrigerator, stared at the contents without really seeing them, and closed it again. The plastic-wrapped plate on the counter contained what looked like leftover Chinese takeout. Maggie's idea of cooking these days. My phone buzzed. Text message from Sarge, my old riding buddy and the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. "Road dogs meeting tomorrow night. You should come." I almost smiled. Almost. Sarge had been trying to get me back to the clubhouse for months, said I needed to remember who I was before I forgot completely. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that playing house with a woman who couldn't stand the sight of me was going to work out somehow. Maggie finally ended her call, but instead of acknowledging my presence, she immediately started scrolling through her phone, probably texting the same man she'd just spent an hour talking to. "Long day?" I asked, because someone had to break the silence. She replied without looking up. "Brett and I had to work late on the Morrison contract. Very complicated stuff. You wouldn't understand." There it was. The casual dismissal, the subtle reminder that her work was important and intellectual, while mine was just blue-collar grunt labor with an engineering degree attached. Never mind that I designed the systems that kept half the manufacturing plants in the county running. Never mind that my simple job paid for the house she was so proud of, the car she drove, the clothes she wore. "Try me," I said. "I might surprise you." She finally looked up, and for a second I saw something flicker across her face. Annoyance? Guilt? It was gone too quickly to tell. "It's just work, Pete. Legal stuff. Boring." Right. Boring. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and popped it open. About as boring as spending every evening on the phone with your boss. "Brett is a professional colleague," she said, her voice taking on that icy tone I'd grown to hate. "Some of us take our careers seriously, and some of us take our marriages seriously." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a crash. Maggie's face went through several expressions before settling on wounded innocence. "I don't know what you're implying, Pete, but I don't appreciate the accusation." "I'm not implying anything, I'm saying it straight out. You spend more time talking to Brett Garis than you do talking to your own husband." She stood up, smoothing down her skirt with sharp, angry movements. "Maybe that's because Brett doesn't come home covered in grease, tracking mud through the house, acting like some kind of caveman. Maybe that's because Brett sits behind a desk all day instead of actually working for a living. At least he has ambition. At least he's going somewhere in life." The words hit like a slap. I took a long pull from my beer, tasting bitterness that had nothing to do with the hops. "Where exactly is he going, Maggie? And are you planning to go with him?" Her face flushed red, which told me everything I needed to know. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, my phone rang. Jamie's ringtone. My 15-year-old son calling at 9:30 on a school night. That wasn't normal. "Dad?" His voice was small, scared. "Dad, I need help." Every parental instinct I had went into high alert. "What's wrong, buddy? Where are you?" "I'm at Mom's house. Brett's here, and Dad, he locked me out. It's raining, and I don't have my key, and Mom's not answering her phone." The world went red around the edges. My ex-wife lived 20 minutes away, and my son was standing in the rain because some suit-wearing piece of garbage had decided to flex his authority over a kid. "Stay where you can see the house," I told him. "I'm coming to get you." I hung up and looked at Maggie, who'd gone pale. "Your boyfriend's got some explaining to do," I said, grabbing my keys. "Pete, wait. Let me call." "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about her feelings. You want to know what a real man does? A real man protects his kid, even from the people who are supposed to love him. I was halfway to the door when she called after me. "Don't do anything stupid, Pete. Brett has connections. Important people who—" I turned around, and whatever she saw in my face made her take a step back. "Let me tell you something about important people, Maggie. They bleed just like everybody else." The rain was coming down harder when I fired up my truck, but I barely noticed. My hands were shaking with rage as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Sarge answered on the second ring. "Baker? What's wrong?" "I need the crew," I said. "How fast can you get to Maple Street?" 10 minutes. What are we dealing with?" "Some punk locked my boy out in the rain. Time to remind him what respect looks like." "Copy that, brother. Thunder's coming." I could hear him grinning through the phone. The road dogs had been quiet for too long, trying to respect my domestic situation. But some lines you don't cross, and messing with a man's child is the biggest one of all. By the time I reached my ex-wife's neighborhood, I could hear the rumble of Harley engines in the distance. The cavalry was coming, and Brett Garis was about to learn that some problems can't be solved with political connections and expensive lawyers. The rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, and I couldn't help but think that maybe it was washing away more than just the dirt. The sound of 6 Harley-Davidson motorcycles rolling through a quiet suburban neighborhood at 10 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday night is something you feel in your chest as much as you hear. The thunder of chrome and steel echoed off the neat little houses with their perfect lawns and their 2-car garages, and I watched curtains twitch as the neighbors peered out to see what was happening on their peaceful street. I pulled up behind the convoy, my truck's headlights cutting through the rain and mist. There was Jamie, huddled under the narrow overhang by the front door, soaked through and shivering. My boy, my 15-year-old son who'd never hurt anybody in his life, standing in the cold because some middle-aged lawyer thought he could play power games with a kid. Sarge turned off his engine and stepped off his bike, water dripping from his leather jacket. At 62, he still looked strong enough to take on a grizzly bear and win. Tank and Lou stood beside him, both surveying the house with sharp focus, as if preparing for a mission. The other 3 men moved into position, sealing off the street in both directions. No one would be coming or going until things were resolved. "Jamie!" I called out, jogging across the wet pavement. My son looked up, relief flooding his face. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call." "Don't you ever apologize for calling me," I said, wrapping him in a hug. His clothes were soaked through, and he was shaking from more than just the cold. "What happened?" "Mom went to the store, and Brett said he was in charge. I asked if I could get a snack from the kitchen, and he told me to get out of his sight. When I went outside to wait for Mom, he locked the door behind me. That was 2 hours ago." 2 hours. My son had been standing in the rain for 2 hours while Brett Garis sat comfortable and dry inside, probably watching television or making business calls, not giving a damn about the kid he'd thrown out like trash. The front door opened, and Brett stepped onto the porch, his face twisted with annoyance. He'd changed out of his work clothes into khakis and a polo shirt, looking like he was ready for a country club dinner, instead of dealing with the consequences of his actions. "What is this?" he demanded, gesturing at the bikers. "Some kind of intimidation tactic?" I walked up to the porch, Sarge and Tank flanking me. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the air still crackled with electricity from the storm. "This is a father coming to get his son," I said. "The son you locked out in the rain like he was some kind of stray dog." Brett's face flushed. The boy was being disrespectful. I was teaching him a lesson about— "You were teaching him nothing," Sarge interrupted, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "You were being a punk who picks on kids because he's too weak to handle grown men." "I don't have to listen to this," Brett said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said. "Call them. I'd love to explain to Officer Martinez why my son was locked out of his mother's house for 2 hours. I'm sure the Department of Social Services would be real interested in that story, too." Brett hesitated, his finger hovering over his phone. He was smart enough to realize that calling the cops might backfire on him, but too proud to back down gracefully. "This is harassment," he said finally. "I have every right to discipline the children in my household." "He's not your child," I said, taking a step closer. "He's mine. And in case you forgot, this isn't your house either. You're just the guy who's been sleeping in my ex-wife's bed." The words hit home. Brett's face went from red to purple, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure in front of the neighbors who were definitely watching from their windows now. "You can't talk to me like that," he sputtered. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of connections I have in this town?" Tank let out a bark of laughter. "Connections? What are you gonna do? Sue us for caring about a kid?" "I could have you all arrested for trespassing, for threatening behavior." "What threatening behavior?" Lou asked innocently. "We're just standing here having a conversation." That's when Sarge stepped forward, and I had to admire his timing. As if by accident, his elbow caught the side mirror of Brett's precious red Mustang, which was parked in the driveway. The mirror snapped off with a satisfying crack and clattered to the ground. "Oops," Sarge said, not sounding sorry at all. Clumsy of me. Brett stared at his damaged car, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You broke my mirror? Accidents happen, I said, especially when you're not paying attention to what's important. I walked over to where a bucket sat by the garden hose, probably left over from washing cars or watering plants. It was half full of rainwater and mud from the storm. Perfect. Here's the thing, Brett, I said, picking up the bucket. You like playing games with kids. You like throwing your weight around, making people feel small, but you picked the wrong kid this time. His eyes went wide as he realized what I was planning. You wouldn't dare. I always said I'd take care of my kid, I replied. Tonight I'll settle for just teaching you some manners. The muddy water hit him square in the chest, soaking through his polo shirt and running down his khakis. He stood there sputtering and gasping, looking like a drowned rat with a bad comb-over. "You're insane!" he shouted. "You're all insane!" Maybe, I said, but my son's not standing in the rain anymore. Jamie had been watching the whole thing with wide eyes, but now he was trying not to smile. For the first time in months, I felt like his dad again, instead of just some guy who paid child support. The front door slammed open, and my ex-wife Carol came running out, grocery bags in her hands. She took one look at Brett dripping on the porch and the bikers in her driveway, and immediately started yelling. "What is going on here? Pete, what have you done?" "I came to get my son," I said calmly. "The son your boyfriend locked out in the rain." Carol's face went through several expressions as she processed this information. She looked at Jamie, still shivering in his wet clothes, then at Brett, who was trying to wring muddy water out of his shirt. "Brett, is this true?" "The boy was being disrespectful," Brett said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "I was just trying to establish some boundaries." "By locking him outside in a thunderstorm?" Carol's voice was rising. "Are you out of your mind?" This was interesting. I'd expected Carol to automatically take Brett's side, the way she usually did, but seeing her son cold and wet seemed to have triggered her maternal instincts. "It wasn't that bad," Brett protested. "He could have sat in the garage." "The garage was locked too," Jamie said quietly. "I checked." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighbors seemed to be holding their breath. Carol looked at Brett like she was seeing him for the first time. "Get in the house," she said. "We need to talk." "Carol, you can't seriously be taking their side. Look what they did to my car." "I said get in the house." Brett shot me a look full of pure hatred, but he couldn't argue with Carol's tone. He slunk inside like a scolded dog, leaving a trail of muddy water behind him. "Thank you," Carol said to me, and I could hear the genuine gratitude in her voice. I didn't know. I would never have left him alone with Jamie if I'd thought. "I know," I said. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again." She nodded and put her arm around Jamie. "Come on, honey. Let's get you into some dry clothes." As they headed toward the house, Jamie looked back at me and mouthed the words, "Thank you." That look was worth more than all of Brett's political connections combined. Sarge clapped me on the shoulder. "Feel better, brother?" "Getting there," I said, "but something tells me this isn't over." I was right. As we were mounting up to leave, Brett appeared at the living room window, phone pressed to his ear. Even through the rain and glass, I could read his lips well enough to know he was talking to someone in authority. Police, probably, or maybe one of those important connections he kept bragging about. "Let him make his calls," Tank said, noticing my attention. "We didn't break any laws tonight." "Laws and politics aren't always the same thing," I replied. "This guy's got friends in high places. He's not going to let this slide." Lou fired up his Harley, the engine growling like a caged animal. "Then we better be ready for round 2. As we rode back through the rain-slicked streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been just the beginning. Brett Garis wasn't the type to accept humiliation gracefully, and men like him had ways of getting revenge that didn't involve getting their hands dirty. But for now, my son was safe and dry, and Brett was learning that actions have consequences. Sometimes that's enough to get you through the night. The storm was passing, but I could still hear thunder in the distance. Or maybe that was just the sound of 6 Harleys heading home, carrying men who remembered what it meant to stand up for family. Either way, it was music to my ears. The knock on my apartment door came at 7 in the morning, sharp and official. I'd been expecting it since I watched Brett make his phone calls through the rain-streaked window, but that didn't make it any more pleasant. 2 uniformed officers stood in my hallway, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Pete Grady, the taller one, Officer Martinez, had been a regular at the garage where I used to work weekends. Good guy, fair cop, but he had a job to do. "That's me," I said, stepping aside to let them in. My apartment was small but clean, the kind of place a divorced mechanical engineer ends up when he's starting over at 42. "Coffee?" "This isn't a social call, Pete," Martinez said, though he looked uncomfortable. "We got a complaint last night. Harassment, intimidation, destruction of property." "Whose property?" I asked, pouring myself a cup and leaning against the kitchen counter. "Brett Garis. Says you and some biker friends showed up at his residence, threatened him, and damaged his vehicle." "His residence?" I couldn't help but smile. "That's my ex-wife's house, and I was picking up my son. As for the vehicle, accidents happen when you're not paying attention to what matters." The younger officer, someone I didn't recognize, stepped forward. "Mr. Garis says you threw a bucket of water on him." "Muddy water," I corrected. "And yeah, I did that. Man locks my kid out in a thunderstorm. He gets wet. Seems fair to me." Martinez sighed and pulled out his notepad. "Pete, I've got to ask, did you or any of your associates threaten Mr. Garis in any way? We had a conversation about respect and responsibility. If he felt threatened by that, maybe he should examine his own actions." "That's not really an answer. It's the only answer you're getting without my lawyer present." The younger cop bristled, but Martinez held up a hand. "Nobody's under arrest here. We're just trying to get the facts straight." "Facts are simple," I said. "My son called me, scared and cold, because Brett Garis locked him out of the house for 2 hours during a storm. I went to get my boy, brought some friends for moral support, and expressed my displeasure with Mr. Garis's childcare methods. End of story. Mr. Garis sees it differently. I bet he does. Did he mention why my son was locked outside?" Martinez made a note. "He says the boy was being disrespectful. 15-year-old asked for a snack. Real threatening behavior there." The 2 officers exchanged glances. Martinez closed his notepad and handed me a business card. "Look, Pete, I know you're a good guy, but Garis has friends downtown, if you know what I mean. He's pushing for a restraining order, says he fears for his safety." "His safety?" I laughed. "From what?" "From you and your biker friends. Tell you what, Martinez, next time Brett Garis fears for his safety, maybe he should try not picking on children. Just a thought." After they left, I called in sick to work and headed over to Sarge's garage. The road dogs had been using the back room as an unofficial clubhouse for 20 years, and it was the one place in town where I could think clearly. Sarge was already there, along with Tank and Lou. They looked up when I walked in, reading the expression on my face. "Cops?" Sarge asked. "Brett's making noise about restraining orders and harassment charges. Says he's got friends who'll make trouble for us." Tank spat into an empty oil can. "Let him try. We didn't do anything wrong." "Wrong and illegal are 2 different things," I said. "This guy's connected. He could make our lives difficult if he wants to." Lou had been quiet, staring at his phone. Now he looked up with a strange expression on his face. "Speaking of making trouble," he said, "I just got a text from someone claiming to know about last night. Says they have information that could help us." "What kind of information?" Sarge asked. "Doesn't say. Just wants to meet." Something felt off about that, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Where?" "Denny's on Route 9. 1 hour." I looked around the room at my oldest friends, men I'd trusted with my life more times than I could count. But money had a way of changing people, and Brett Garis had access to plenty of it. "I'll go alone," I said. "Like hell you will," Sarge replied. "We're in this together." "No, this smells like a setup. If it goes sideways, I don't want you guys caught in the middle." An hour later, I was sitting in a corner booth at Denny's, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the parking lot. The mysterious contact turned out to be Becky Williams, Maggie's best friend and the biggest gossip in 3 counties. She slid into the booth across from me, looking nervous and excited at the same time. "Pete, I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want, Becky?" She glanced around the restaurant like she was afraid of being overheard. "It's about Maggie and Brett. I think you should know what's really going on." "I already know what's going on." "No, you don't. Not all of it." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "They've been planning this for months. The thing with your son last night. That wasn't an accident." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "Brett's been trying to get Jamie to act out, to give him an excuse to discipline him. He wants to prove that you're an unfit father, that you raised a disrespectful kid. Last night was supposed to be the final straw." "Supposed to be?" "He was going to call the police himself, claim that Jamie threatened him or something, make it look like the boy was dangerous. But then you showed up with your friends, and it all went sideways." The pieces were starting to fit together. "Why are you telling me this?" Becky's face flushed. "Because I like Jamie. He's a good kid, and he doesn't deserve what they're planning to do to him. And because—" She hesitated. "Because I think you should know that Maggie's been recording your phone calls." "What?" "She has an app on her phone. Every time you call her about Jamie or money or anything, she records it. Brett says they're building a case to prove you're unstable." My hands were shaking with rage, but I kept my voice level. "How long has this been going on?" "Since the divorce was finalized, maybe longer." I thought about all the conversations I'd had with Maggie over the past year, all the times I'd lost my temper or said something harsh. If they'd been recording everything, editing it together, they could make me sound like a dangerous lunatic. "There's more," Becky said. "Brett's been coaching Maggie on what to say to make you angry. He wants you to threaten them, to do something stupid that he can use in court." "And you're just telling me this now because?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I was scared. Brett's got connections, Pete. Real ones. He could make trouble for me at work, with my family. But after last night, seeing what he did to Jamie—" She shook her head. "Some things are more important than being safe." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you. This takes guts. Just promise me you'll be careful. They're not done with you yet." I drove back to the garage with my mind racing. Brett and Maggie had been playing a long game, setting traps and recording conversations, building a case to destroy my relationship with my son. Last night's confrontation had disrupted their timeline, but it wouldn't stop them. If anything, it had probably made them more desperate. The guys were waiting for me when I got back, and I filled them in on what Becky had told me. Sarge listened without interrupting, his face getting darker with each detail. "So they've been planning to frame you all along," he said when I finished. "Looks that way." "Then we need to beat them at their own game." Tank cracked his knuckles. "I say we pay another visit to Mr. Garis, convince him to back off." "No," I said. "That's what they want. They're trying to provoke us into doing something stupid." "So what do you suggest?" I thought about it for a minute, turning the problem over in my mind like a mechanical puzzle. Brett and Maggie thought they were smarter than me, that they could manipulate me into destroying myself. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated how much I loved my son. "We're going to give them exactly what they want," I said finally. "But not the way they expect it." Lou looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means we're going to let them think they're winning, right up until the moment we turn their own game against them." Sarge grinned. "Now you're talking like the old baker. What do you need?" "Information. Everything we can find about Brett Garis. His business. his connections, his secrets. Everybody's got something they don't want the world to know. And if we find something? Then we make sure the right people hear about it. But first, I need to have a conversation with my son. Jamie answered his phone on the second ring. Dad, are you okay? Mom said the police came to see you. I'm fine, buddy. Are you? Yeah, I'm at school. Brett left early this morning and Mom's been crying a lot. Listen to me carefully, Jamie. I need you to be extra careful around Brett for the next few days. Don't give him any excuse to claim you were disrespectful or threatening. Can you do that? I guess. Dad, what's really going on? I wanted to tell him everything, to warn him about the trap that Brett and his mother were setting. But Jamie was 15, and he didn't need that burden on his shoulders. Just trust me, okay? And if anything happens, if Brett or anyone else tries to make you uncomfortable, you call me immediately. I will. Dad, thanks for last night, for coming to get me. Always, son. Always. After I hung up, I sat in the garage for a long time, listening to the sound of Sarge and the guys making phone calls, reaching out to contacts throughout the county. The road dogs might look like a bunch of middle-aged bikers, but we had friends in every garage, every bar, every blue-collar workplace in a 50-mile radius. If Brett Garis had secrets, we'd find them. And when we did, he was going to learn that playing games with other people's children was a dangerous hobby. The war was just beginning. The recording came from an unexpected source. Jamie had been carrying his phone in his shirt pocket during his last visit to his mother's house, and he'd accidentally captured 20 minutes of Brett and Maggie's private conversation. When he played it for me 3 days after the Denny's meeting, I knew we'd found our weapon. He's not even a real man, Brett's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Just some washed-up biker who thinks he's tough because he rides a motorcycle. Maggie, honey, you deserve so much better than that loser. I know, Maggie's voice replied, but he's Jamie's father, so I have to deal with him. Not for much longer. Once we get that restraining order, and I document his unstable behavior, we can petition for supervised visitation only, maybe eventually cut him out completely. What about Jamie? He loves his father. Brett's laugh was cold and calculating. Kids adapt. Give him 6 months with a real father figure and he'll forget all about Pete the Grease Monkey. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Brett detailing his plans to manipulate the legal system and Maggie agreeing to every scheme. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a human being, and they discussed my son like he was property to be acquired. But the most damaging part came near the end, when Brett started bragging about his connections. Judge Morrison owes me 3 favors from the Henderson case. The police chief's wife works at my firm. I've got the family court commissioner in my pocket from that zoning deal last year. Pete Grady doesn't stand a chance. I looked at Jamie, who was staring at his phone with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I can't believe Mom would say those things about you, he said quietly. People change, son, sometimes not for the better. What are we going to do with this? I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt genuine. We're going to let the whole town hear what kind of man Brett Garis really is. The plan came together over the next 2 days. Sarge's network had done its job, providing us with Brett's schedule, his habits, and most importantly, his weaknesses. Brett Garis was a creature of routine who liked to be seen at all the right places by all the right people. Every Friday evening, he attended the happy hour at Flanagan's Pub, the upscale restaurant where the town's legal and business community gathered to network and gossip. It was the perfect venue for our purposes. Lou's cousin worked as a bartender at Flanagan's, and he owed the road dogs a favor from when we'd helped him out of some trouble with loan sharks 2 years earlier. Getting access to the sound system would be easy. The hard part would be timing. Friday evening found me sitting in my truck across the street from Flanagan's, watching the parking lot fill up with expensive cars and self-important people. Brett's red Mustang was easy to spot, parked in a prime location near the front entrance. My phone buzzed. Text from Sarge. Sound system ready. You sure about this? I typed back, never been more sure of anything. At exactly 7 o'clock, I walked into Flanagan's wearing my best jeans and a clean shirt. The place was packed with lawyers, real estate agents, city council members, and other pillars of the community. Brett was holding court at a corner table, surrounded by his usual crowd of admirers. I caught Lou's cousin Danny behind the bar and gave him a subtle nod. He nodded back and casually reached for the sound system controls. The restaurant's background music faded out, replaced by the clear sound of Brett's voice discussing his plans to destroy my relationship with my son. The conversations around the room gradually died as people realized what they were hearing. Kids adapt. Give him 6 months with a real father figure, and he'll forget all about Pete the grease monkey. Brett's face went white as he recognized his own words. He looked around frantically, trying to figure out where the recording was coming from, but Danny had hidden the phone behind the bar where no one could see it. The recording continued, detailing Brett's schemes and his casual dismissal of Jamie's feelings. But the real bombshell came when his voice started naming names, bragging about the judges and officials he claimed to control. Judge Morrison owes me 3 favors from the Henderson case. The police chief's wife works at my firm. I've got the family court commissioner in my pocket from that zoning deal last year. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Judge Morrison was sitting 2 tables away from Brett, his face turning purple with rage. The police chief's wife was staring at Brett like he'd just confessed to multiple felonies. Brett jumped up from his table, knocking over his drink. "Turn that off! This is illegal! You can't record private conversations!" But the damage was done. Everyone in the room had heard him bragging about corrupting public officials and manipulating the legal system. They'd heard him dismiss a child's feelings and plot to destroy a father's relationship with his son. The recording ended with Brett's voice saying, "Pete Grady doesn't stand a chance." I stood up from my table near the back of the room and walked toward the exit, making sure everyone could see my face. As I passed Brett's table, I stopped and looked down at him. "You're right about one thing, Brett," I said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I don't stand a chance. Not against a man who's willing to use a child as a weapon and brag about bribing public officials." The sarcasm in my voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. "But then again, I'm just a grease monkey. What do I know about real men?" I walked out of Flanagan's to the sound of angry voices and scraping chairs. Through the window, I could see Brett trying to explain himself to a room full of people who'd just heard him confess to corruption and child manipulation. My phone started buzzing before I reached my truck. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Word was spreading through the town's gossip network faster than a wildfire. By the time I got home, there were 17 messages on my answering machine. 3 were from reporters who'd somehow already heard about the recording. 5 were from lawyers offering their services. The rest were from friends and acquaintances expressing their support. The most important message was from Carol, my ex-wife. "Pete, I just heard about what happened at Flanagan's. I want you to know that I had no idea Brett was planning those things. I thought he genuinely cared about Jamie, but I was wrong. Can we talk? Please?" I called her back immediately. "Carol, it's Pete." "Oh, thank God. Pete, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was using me to get to you and Jamie." "Where is he now?" "Gone. He packed his things and left about an hour ago. Said the town had turned against him and he needed to go somewhere he could start over." "And Jamie?" "He's here with me. He wants to talk to you." A moment later, my son's voice came through the phone. "Dad? I heard what happened. The whole school's talking about it. Are you okay with that? Are you kidding? Brett's been acting like he was my father for months, and now everybody knows what a fake he is. I'm proud of you, Dad." Those words meant more to me than all the congratulations and support messages combined. "So what happens now?" Jamie asked. "Now we get back to being a family, the real kind, not the fake kind that Brett was trying to create." Does this mean you and Mom might get back together? I looked out my apartment window at the lights of the town, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. I don't know, son, but it means we're going to figure out what's best for you, without anyone else pulling the strings. The next morning brought news that Brett Garis had resigned from his law firm and left town. His red Mustang was found abandoned at the bus station, and nobody seemed to know where he'd gone. Judge Morrison issued a public statement denying any improper relationship with Brett and announcing an investigation into all cases Brett had handled in his courtroom. The police chief launched an internal affairs investigation into Brett's claims about his wife's influence. But the most satisfying news came from Maggie herself, who called me Saturday morning to apologize. Pete, I was wrong. About everything. I let Brett convince me that you weren't good enough, that Jamie would be better off without you. I see now that I was the one who wasn't good enough. We all make mistakes, Maggie. Some mistakes are bigger than others. I almost let him destroy your relationship with our son. But you didn't, and Jamie's okay. That's what matters. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I know you probably can't forgive me for what I did, but I want you to know that I remember who you used to be, who you still are. You're a good man, Pete. I forgot that for a while, but I remember now. I thought about forgiveness, about second chances, and the price of holding grudges. Brett Garis was gone, his schemes exposed, and his reputation destroyed. Justice had been served, and my son was safe. Maybe that was enough. We'll figure it out, Maggie, one day at a time. After I hung up, I sat in my small apartment and listened to the sound of Saturday morning traffic outside my window. For the first time in months, the future felt like something to look forward to instead of something to endure. My phone buzzed with another text message, this one from Sarge. Road Dogs meeting tonight. Time to celebrate. I smiled and typed back, I'll be there, brother. Thunder Road wasn't closed yet, but Brett Garis's path had reached its final stop, and sometimes that's the closest thing to justice you can hope for.